Ventures, and I'm very excited about this panel because we are going to be talking about one of the hottest areas in the industry these days, which is the world of data. A lot of people in the industry think that this is the next big wave, that there are tremendous opportunities for entrepreneurs to succeed in that world. Reid Hoffman earlier this year pretty much said that data was the foundation of Web 3.0. So what does it all mean? What are the opportunities for you guys, the entrepreneurs, to create either data-centric businesses or data-centric products? I'm joined by some of the sharpest minds in the industry. These guys are really good. You don't want to miss this. Roger Ehrenberg is the founder and managing partner of IA Ventures, a venture capital fund that invests exclusively in big data businesses. Before that was a very prolific angel investor and a Wall Street veteran. Joe Fernandez is a co-founder and the CEO of Cloud. So I'm actually curious, how many of you know their cloud score? Quite a few. How many of you check it obsessively every day to see how it's evolved?
I can look out over the crowd and actually see cloud scores above me. So.
And last but not least, Sean Gourley, Rhodes Scholar, TED Fellow, and now the founder and CTO of Quid, which is another very interesting Silicon Valley startup. So, Roger, maybe to start with you. So, data itself is nothing new, right? It's been around pretty much since computers have existed. There already have been businesses like Bloomberg or Axiom that were created on the business of aggregating and selling data. So what is new? Why is it such a big deal these days?
I think it's the combination of the sheer magnitude of the data that we now have at our fingertips, as well as the velocity of the data. So we're talking about web scale, where real-time customer transactions, searches, interactions, connections on the web, in addition to in the Wall Street applications of high-speed trading, where the only limit is the speed of light, and then you've got the storage element. So on the one hand, you've got things like EC2 and AWS, which facilitate the storage of massive amounts of data without your own big iron architecture, and at the same time, the CPUs to be able to process that magnitude of data has just upped the ante to such an extent that we couldn't have imagined even 10 years ago.
So the specific topic of this panel is really the business of data. So I'm actually interested, to hear your guys' perspective on how do you build, the next billion-dollar company based on data? And out of the two of you, who's going to build the biggest business? And maybe you can start by reminding the audience about Cloud.
Sure. So at Cloud, we're the standard for measuring how influential people are online. We look at all the content you create across 13 different networks, and by topic, rate people 1 to 100 to understand how influential they are. How when Sean or Roger tweets or puts a Facebook status update about the movie they just saw, how many of their friends are going to go see it. We're processing a huge amount of data, and data is core to our business. But in terms of the business of it, I actually think I look out that that's not for like 2 to 3 years for us, the real monetization part. We actually are monetizing kind of on simple stuff around campaigns for advertisers that are tied to our influencers. Cloud is my third venture, third startup that I founded, and the other two are also in data, and kind of having gone down the road of pure data sales, it's painful. And I think what we find, the use of our data has grown exponentially. In January, we were doing 100 million transactions a month on our API from about 1,000 partners. In September, we did over 10 billion from 5,000 partners. So, but the desire to pay for it, I don't know, is there. We're still focused on being the standard and getting distribution. I think it's still a little ways away from truly monetizable.
Right. So for us, I think data is something you don't really want to pay for, because you got a database and you store it, and like why do I want that? Most of the time for us, and what Quid does is we're trying to provide a platform for people to make decisions. And so our clients are governments, large corporations, big finance that are trying to make decisions about complex global systems in the world. And for them, the data is sort of a means to get to that decision. And so for us, when you sort of talk about big data, we're trying to make the data smaller, and we try and kind of make an interface for humans to kind of interact and engage with that data. And the truth is, if you can do that well, and you can give people a better insight to billion-dollar decisions, they'll pay a lot of money for it. And so we're kind of in a nice place on that. I think maybe we'll check back in a couple of years and see kind of how we're doing. Who's got the bigger company? But I think, there's two sides of it. We want to understand the complexity of the world for governments and corporations, but we also want to understand the sort of social interactions. And, one's going to be a consumer model and one's going to be a corporate model.
So, Roger, help us put this in context, if you will. So we have two very interesting businesses here, which are essentially aggregating third-party data and extracting intelligence out of it. But the big data stack is very large, right? There's all sorts of different companies. Where do you see the value? Is it better to resell data, aggregate data, provide the tools? Where do you see the value?
So I think the fact is there's value at each layer, and to say which is better than another, very, very tough. So you're talking about core compute, database, predictive analytics, data visualization. It's all important, and I think Sean, he's talking about actionable information, which is hugely valuable, but providing a platform such that the user can get that intelligence out of the system. I think cloud is a precursor. It is an input into a decision-making process. Both are valuable. They're different, and they sit at different levels of the stack. So if you look at the iVentures portfolio companies, they are also at very different places in the stack, some of which are, like a company like A Recorded Future, more like a decision tool, or a MetaMarkets with a dashboard, a little bit more like that. So it's all valuable. You just need to do something that A, scales to massive size, and B, where you've developed a sales methodology that itself scales.
I think that this, you wrote interesting things about contributory business models around data. Can you elaborate about that?
Sure. So I think there's a whole new wave of businesses around this notion of contributory databases, where users will actually put their data in. So let's say they contribute X, but then they actually get X plus 1 back because they receive back intelligence from not only their own data, but the data of others. So you get these nonlinear network effects as more people add to the corpus, that the output that's shared with all the contributors goes up. So a company like BillGuard in our portfolio, which is crowdsourced credit card fraud detection, every time somebody flags a charge and says, this is fraudulent, that then goes into their machine learning algorithms and gets kind of horizontally exposed across the system. So the next person's dashboard incorporates that information.
So does it mean there is a concept of network effect in data? And maybe for you guys as well, I'm interested in how defensible are those businesses? So, Joe, for example, you pretty much invented an industry, right? You created this new social measurement norm, and there are new entrants into this industry. Is the fact that you are the first one, that you have the biggest name, is that where the defensible advantage lies?
I mean, we think being the standard is really important for what we're doing, and that has been our strategy kind of throughout the process, has been be everywhere. Like, I get mad when CNN scrolls tweets and there's not clout scores next to it. So I think there is huge network effects when we do 10 billion API calls a month and they all have the clout logo next to them. And you can't talk about this space without talking about clout because we are everywhere. That kind of data dominance for us is a key part of our long-term strategy.
Yes, certainly. I think the network effects come in when you're able to make more data sets play nicely with each other. And so when data comes in, say it's coming in from an FDA drug filing, and you want to try and link that up with the private equity that's gone into that investment, when you want to try and link that up again with any academic research papers published in that discipline, and any job hiring that's being done within the universities. So you've got 5 or 6 different data sets. Now, if you can bring them all together, all of a sudden you start to kind of get the full picture of what's happening. And so the network effects really come in by making data play nicely.
And I actually think that brings up a super important issue, which is that of data cleansing and normalization, that the sheer act of pulling together these disparate data sets and then putting the data in a form where they can play nicely with one another is really, really hard. I mean, that itself is not a commodity. The skills and efforts to do that are very valuable, which is, I think, why you've seen a lot of companies emerge lately which represent kind of the core operating stack for application developers to build on top of, whether on the web or on mobile, where they address a lot of these data integration issues and make it super easy for the person who just wants to build the application layer on top.
So very much to that point, so could you maybe tell the audience, any entrepreneur that's interested in starting a business in the data world these days, how do you even start? I mean, you have what now, 100 million cloud scores? I mean,
we just hit 300 million.
300 million, okay. So right. I just read 100 million.
Yeah,
a month ago.
we're growing fast.
So, I mean, how does that work? I mean, you two guys, at a Starbucks table one day, and you fire up an EC2 instance, and you start getting data. How do you build a data business from scratch?
Yeah, I mean, the good news is there's no shortage of data inputs in terms of where I play, which is the social web. The mega trend there is more people creating more data that's more accessible. And from a business standpoint, whether it's services like DataSift are those types of companies that can help you get a unified delivery mechanism for that data to you. It's a matter of the challenging part is then doing that at scale. When Clout launched, we had scores on less than 2,000 people when we publicly launched. And now we have scores on 300 million people that we refresh every day. And doing that, the mechanisms of building the pipelines to handle that is where it becomes a challenge. But if I were starting over, and at the time there wasn't GNIPS and DataSifts and these companies, we were just hitting pure APIs, and it was a major hassle. But the good news is that it is much easier, at least on the social web, to get access to amazing data.
What about you, Sean? Where do you get the data? Do you crawl it? Do you use APIs? Where does it come from?
Yeah, there's a lot of crawling and structuring of raw text. I think the idea that all information is kind of searchable is sort of the Google kind of mentality, but the reality is, a lot of the information is not structured. It's not in a kind of a bite-sized, chunk size. Who's the person? Where did it happen? When did it happen? If there was an attack in Afghanistan, how many people were killed? How many were injured? And what was the weapon? Like, that stuff is not structured in any kind of form on the web. So, for us, that's sort of, one of the big, challenges is to make that data structured. I think if you're going to go forward and start a business in this, I think the first question you really want to ask is, what problem am I going to solve? And I think if you look back historically at when data has always been valuable, you go back to Tycho Brahe and looking at the movement of stars and sitting down and sort of recording and the position of the planets and as they went across the sky. And the idea there is, well, I want to understand the heavens. And so I'm going to need data to understand the heavens. Just the idea of I'm just going to get data is sort of, if you haven't got a problem you want to solve with the data, there's no sort of point to do it. So I think if you're going to go down and start a business, find a good problem. And if you want to solve, online influence, then, go and do that. If you want to go and solve the spread of epidemics, then go and do that.
Interesting. So what do your businesses look like in terms of teams? Still to that point about how you create a data business, do you have a bunch of, who has the most PhDs on the
How many you got?
on the team?
I think we're 8 right now.
11. But you do want smart people.
I'm going to recruit them.
You're going to get them? Yeah. Well, no, they're coming to your business, yeah. But I think you want a lot of smart people. Like it is based around that. For us, one of the big problems is dimensionality reduction. And you want to go from a big, complex world to something that's sort of bite-sized and accessible for humans. And so we employ a lot of physicists and particularly string theorists, because they had spent a lot of time doing this dimensionality reduction down. How do you reduce the dimensionality of the world while keeping as much information in it as possible? And it turns out string theory has a lot to kind of offer on this. So yeah, they're interesting teams. You have economists and mathematicians and string theorists and physicists, and then you have your hardcore natural language processors and machine learners. And then you've got to put that on top of a bunch of interactive designers. We pull them from gaming companies, so they kind of create this augmented reality to navigate these complex spaces. So it's a pretty cool place.
Yeah, I think the diversity of skill set is critical. And the good news is if you're doing interesting things with data, I know at least for us, like I feel we have a shot at anybody, whether they're at Facebook or Google or doing, wherever they're doing their PhD. People want access to the biggest data sources and doing the coolest things with it. And I honestly feel like we have a shot at anybody.
I think one role was conspicuously missing from either of your descriptions, and that's the role of the data hacker, which I think has become increasingly valuable in a world where, in terms of the raw plumbing and the building the stack in order to deliver, say, your product, but then let's say you're Joe and you've got the sea of data. Well, what are the other ways in which I can extract value from this data that's not simply the delivery mechanism he's got today? You need someone who's applied and skilled and who can hack code and try a bunch of things to actually see signal in data. And that is a very specific competency, and they do not teach that in graduate school. That's something you get by being a hacker. And in fact, some of the best data hackers aren't PhDs. They're people that, dropped out of high school when they were 15 and did programming to make some money and then built a company.
That's fascinating. So, we've spoken about big data a lot. And to that point, let's talk about small data for a second. Is there value in small data? If I'm, a member of the audience here and I run a fashion e-commerce website, can I do interesting things with data without having a PhD or a data hacker on board?
Yeah, I think, the question is, what's the precursor to the small data? If the big data is transformed into small data, for instance, Joe's cloud score, right? So there is a lot of value in that single metric, but behind that metric, is a lot of stuff. So if you have kind of the right metrics, then yes, I think small data can be unbelievably powerful, especially in the influence realm, because there are plenty of circumstances where wisdom of crowds and large data don't give you better answers. In fact, it's much more valuable to go to a few extremely knowledgeable people to get a particular answer. So that's where influence together with domain, so it's not just popularity, but it's with respect to a particular domain, is where kind of small data becomes most valuable.
What about data-centric products? Have you guys seen, you guys are building big data businesses, but in the Valley, have you seen people doing interesting things, creating products which are essentially fueled by data and are more efficient because they are fueled by data?
I hear Bloomberg does it right.
It's big data business. Yes. No, I'm more thinking of, LinkedIn does some very interesting things with data, Zynga does, Amazon, again, if I'm an entrepreneur, how do I create a product using data? What are my options, I guess?
Just use it to get people to buy more stuff. I think that's the sort of the default model that's out in the Valley, unfortunately, is, most of the people playing with data are, trying to use it to drive kind of consumer spending. And whilst that's good, and
or ad viewing,
or ad viewing, right? Can you give me a better ad? So when I click on a Facebook, are you going to give me an ad that I'm more likely to click on? And that's where a lot of this activity is happening. So I don't think that's the breadth of what big data can do, but that's certainly probably a reasonable place to start.
I'm really excited about companies like Uber and Zarly and Airbnb that are kind of taking the infrastructure of online and the data around that and applying it to real-world problems that, opportunities. I'm interested to see how they use data going forward, and I think that's a really exciting opportunity that I've seen out in the Valley.
Yeah, and the fact is, those businesses themselves are not super tech intensive, right? They're just leveraging very basic building blocks, and this gets to the kind of contributory data aspect.
Yeah.
As you get more users and as you build this rich database of experience and feedback, that then can be leveraged to target so you stayed in this place previously. Here's one that you might really, really like, that it's kind of like kind of bringing the Amazon type experience to every kind of every kind of buying experience.
Let me, I want to jump in there because you also made the point, Roger, in I think the first or second episode of Techstars when the very business was being first presented. I can't remember the original name, but you said, this is a content business, publishing business, not a tech business.
Right.
Where do you draw the distinction? I mean, what is for you a pure tech, and what is just data or publishing or content? I mean,
so that's a very, very hard question to answer.
we have more.
In terms of, thanks for asking that. In terms, so a business like Very, where the actually creating content to deliver to customers is a core part of their original value prop, that just does not scale well. I mean, that to me is like the difference between an agency, which doesn't scale well, and a technology company, which can scale well. So things that are either tool providers or platforms, or or something like a bill guard, right, where the content is effectively being created by the users, not by the company. So if content's created out there and it's leveraged for the benefit of everybody, that's one thing, as opposed to the company itself having the responsibility of creating the content and pushing it out. That doesn't scale well. So that's kind of the separation I see between the two business models.
Somebody writes in and says, how much service should a tech company provide? Should startup companies pick tech or service? Do you think about that? Are those two different?
Think about it every day. I mean, I think almost every tech company that I've been involved with has a heavy service component at the beginning, because the bottom line is you're engaging in hand-to-hand combat with that customer and you're trying to get as much feedback as you possibly can, and you want a happy customer, but the tech isn't there. So you jerry-rig it with services laid on top of inadequate tech. And then over time, as you collect customer feedback and you're able to create a more robust, more scalable product, then eventually the service fades out and the scalable tech fades out.
Let me also ask, you mentioned, Sean, I think you mentioned Bloomberg, which is a pretty cool data business.
Yeah.
And branching out into many other different areas. B-Law, for example, for law firms. And also we have a sports data business, which is pretty hot, Moneyball style, Somebody writes in and says, what data sets are missing? What do you wish existed? Which I think is a pretty cool. Do you ever sit around and think about what data sets would be awesome if you had them?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It's sort of the game that we're in, and the example I sort of gave is if you're looking at Afghanistan and looking at the unfolding nature of the war there, it's very difficult to get a complete data set of the weapons that were used to kill people. Now, why would you want that? If you're trying to understand the direction of that conflict and make strategic decisions about to send troops in or out of that place, that's a really important thing to have and to see that move through time. So stuff like that, I think, is pretty valuable. But yeah, I don't know, I won't go into too much, you probably start doing it.
Joe, you have a sweet dream data set?
Less about guns, but still cool. I mean, for us, and I think a lot of, if you're working on the social web, trying to create data, is everyone wants to know, are you giving me insights that's going to turn into ROI? And the closed loop of, if I had sales data, my life would get a lot easier.
All right, sweet. Thank you guys so much. Great panel there. Matt Turck, thanks so much. Panel on data.